Hi, I'm Jarrett Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. Longtime listeners of this show will know that I am deeply interested in the infrastructure that allows creative work to happen, whether that's the administrators who facilitate a particular culture or the publishers who create platforms for content dissemination. I'm in many ways not just interested in the work itself, but the context that allows that work to happen. One of the complaints you often hear in design publishing is the lack of venues for discourse. And one of the reasons there's a lack of venues is that there's little money behind these operations. Publishing, in many ways, has never been easier, and it's also never been harder. The tools to make a website, to make a book, are easily accessible to almost everybody, yet the infrastructure to support these projects can feel non-existent. Who will pay for it? How is it funded? How will it sustain? It's these questions that I wanted to ask my guest today, the publisher, editor, writer, and curator, Freek Lomme. At the end of 2022, Freek started Set Margins, a new publishing venture that he describes as part publisher, part network, and part platform for production to disseminate voices from the margins. In just a little over a year, they've published some of my favorite books in and around design that I'm sure Scratching the Surface listeners would be excited about, like Diagrammatic Writing by Johanna Drucker, Ian Lynham's new book, The Failed Painter, or Silvio LaRusso's What Design Can't Do, which we just featured on the Scratching the Surface site. Prior to Set Margins, Freek was the co-founder and director of the nonprofit art and design space and publisher Onomatopee, based in the Netherlands, where he helped publish a great collection of design books over the years. Freek is someone who knows how to bring people together, he knows how to get books made, and he knows how to get those books in front of people. So in this conversation, Freek and I talk about how books are made, both formally and economically. We talk about his role as publisher and what he is trying to do with Set Margins. We talk about how publishing is like curating. We talk about the politics of bookmaking and why we're still drawn to printed matter. Speaking of the infrastructure of publishing, this show is funded and made possible by listeners like you. For the last 5 years, we've run a Patreon that helps support the show. Members get bonus content each month. If you like what we're doing here, if you're able to support this work, I hope that you would join us on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/surface podcast to sign up. We offer monthly and yearly subscriptions starting at $3 a month. That's patreon.com/surface podcast. It truly helps keep the show going. Thank you so much for listening, and here's my conversation with Freek Lomme. I thought we could start by talking about the name Set Margins, the name of your sort of newish, I guess, kind of publishing thing that we can talk about what that is also. But let's talk about the name for a second, Set Margins, because, you know, that word margins has a very clear double meaning, sort of margins in page layout and book design, but also margins as in working from the margins, thinking about people sort of outside of the center, practitioners, workers, thinkers who are sort of outside of mainstream thought. And it seems like that word margins and that sort of double meaning is important to you. I'm wondering if you could talk about this name, Set Margins, and specifically that word margins and sort of how you think about that and why that's a sort of critical part of your work.
Well, aside of the two aspects that you already mentioned, setting the margins more graphically and the marginal, so to say,
Mm-hmm.
I also kind of like it as a name. You also have the name Set, and then so I could introduce myself. Hi, I'm Set Margins. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
And but yeah, to return to your question, which is a more layered answer, which is more interesting, of the margins. I like setting margins also to really kind of speak up for the margins and not to have them stay in the margins per se. but the margins are just the field where much relevant stuff is happening, which is often underrepresented, unheard, speculative, off in whatever kind of way. And that's a terrain that I'm drawn to somehow, and that I'm curious for and want to kind of mediate. In the end, I started out as a curator very much, which is a mediator. So I kind of like this mediating position, this position to offer services and
Mm.
to help people articulate that in one way or another. Yeah.
I have so many questions just based on what you said there, and I sort of described set margins as a publishing thing, I think, in that first question. And on your website, you write, as a support structure, a platform for production, a network, and a publisher, Set Margins is here to frame current impulses from the margin with particular focus for communication, forms of cooperation, and involved politics. Set Margins delivers critical experiences, discourse, and dialogue. I'm I'm really interested in the first part of that sort of description. You're a support structure, a platform for production, a network, and a publisher.
Yeah, yeah.
What does that look like in practice? Can you sort of describe what set margins is, or how you think about those different components?
Yeah, a mouthful of kind of arty vocabulary, you could say. Well, yeah,
Okay.
that's the way to kind of introduce what you're doing, and then people will take out of that whatever they read, of course. But it kind of covers a lot of the aspects. Yeah, support structure. Support structure. I find that a nice word because yeah, I can offer different services to people. Of course, there's the entry as a publisher you have to distribution
Mm,
in various channels. But there's also editorial support in process management or process
mhm,
coordination or advice or whatever. Because I've made books, I've made a lot of books and kind of know how these kind of dynamics are in between the different players involved. But it can also be more artistic, if you will, more content based. I can, yeah, help writing. I'm not a really good proofreader or copy editor because I'm not really good at grammar and stuff. But and not that much interested for it. I think it's just a really costly thing, which is often kind of, yeah, pushing budgets to a limit where, yeah,
uh,
whatever, you could discuss the efficiency of that. But yeah, so it's a support structure in that wide sense. I
mhm,
evidently also have experience in print management with lots of specs and so forth. I started doing graphic design now recently, so I also know a little bit
mm,
more now about the practice of graphic design. So yeah, that can be helpful. So therefore, it's also a platform for production. The second thing in that mouthful list, um, it's a platform for production of that margin of whatever whoever is brought in or comes about. And of course, yeah, a network and a publisher. And it's good to also say that I'm really a publisher, because sometimes people miss out on it and think, oh, well, what's this actually all about? Oh, he's publisher. Okay, publisher is clear. That's making books, right? Yeah, that's making books. Cool. I want to make a book.
right.
So it's also to kind of get that a little bit together instead of only having this. But yeah, I like the idea of a network very much, a place where different people meet. Uh,
Mhm,
like I see every day in cross sales, people buy Silvio's book and they also buy something else. And I
mhm.
kind of like these things happening. And yeah, so to yeah, this is on the kind of consumer end, but
Yeah.
it's also evidently happening on an artistic level where people come together through me often, or possibly through me, as I kind of know them and think, hey, you should talk with this person because he's interesting for whatever reason.
I thought it was interesting that you said, you know print production, sort of like how to get money to make these books. You don't really think of yourself as an editor. You do some design work, and it sounds to me like publisher is sort of like the overarching way that you could sort of like describe what you do. What does that When you call yourself a publisher, what does that actually mean? Can you talk a little bit about like what you're actually, how you are actually sort of helping people who are wanting to make books?
Well, it might mean different things to different publishers, but to me, more practically speaking, it really starts out from either an idea or something, an initiative that I take myself, or content that I have myself, or content or stuff that other people come up with. And then we look at finances, how can we make this work financially speaking, in terms of costs for the production phase, in terms of returns out of sales. How can we play this about, so to say?
Mm,
But the first question is always really content. What does the content push for? How can we work out of that content? So it's often a kind of, and that's where I'm, an editorial advisor in most cases.
mm,
So it can be more or it can be less, depending also on the qualities of the people with whom I work, and if I initiate something myself, it's evidently way more based on my own kind of creative flow.
right, right.
Yeah, with others, it could be that there's other people who are really good at it, or it could be that I'm a little hesitant and have to step in a little more and see
Mm,
how I deal with that. That's always a little tricky thing as well. Out of the actual content, I work towards the form and the object, and what that kind of ties together. So, and in that, there's a lot of different layers. There's not just the layer of the experience of the book, or the graphic vibe of the book, or the kind of content transfer. But there's also a kind of publishing layer, what works in terms of reception in the different markets,
mm,
what works in terms of maybe academic qualities or less academic qualities. So
right.
all of these layers are often a little hidden. Many books really grow out of a collaboration between a graphic designer and an artist or something.
Hmm.
But then you might miss out on a few of these other components as well. So, for instance, financially speaking, in terms of returns, what can you expect out of returns? What can you do with that with these opportunities? In terms of editorial choices, how does the kind of audiences and the different markets, how can that be reflected in the type of book that you make, and in the editorial choices, which are reflected in writing, which are reflected in the shaping of the content and the dealing with the different spaces within the book object, so to say. Yeah, of course, the more people are involved and the more horizontal things become, the more endless they become, and the more costly, most of
Right,
all, they become. And I
right.
call it endless because it can be really annoying when it gets endless, especially because many of the projects I'm doing have a really low budget. And then people get annoyed, and so it's also a challenge to see how to avoid that and how to kind of manage that with the different people involved. And in many cases, I'm not the commissioner in a way, because I don't show up with the work, so I'm not the author. I don't have the author rights, I feel,
Right.
and I don't have the money per se. I can invest, I can co-produce, but I'm not doing that if I feel like the team is, or there has to be. I have to feel good about the result, that we could create.
I want to come back to the questions of sort of that structure and process and budgets in a second, but I want to go back to something you said earlier about set margins also being a network. And that people will go and they'll buy Silvio LaRusso's new book What Design Can't Do, and then they'll buy something else, and you're sort of putting these different publications in dialogue also. You've been around. You opened Set Margins like two years ago, about a little under 2 years ago.
I think I started in something like September, October last year. So
Okay.
it's a year and a
Okay.
quarter or
Okay.
something.
How do you think about what makes a Set Margins book a Set Margins book? You publish things about graphic design, there's art. I look at the tags on your website, there's anthropology, there's sort of politics, but they
Yeah.
all sort of feel like they are in dialogue with each other. This is an old metaphor, but I think of you as, it's like a record label. It's like there's the individual artists, there's the individual authors, but there's also set margins. I know what I'm going to get when I get a book from you. How do you think about that?
I hope it's true, and I think it's reflected in different aspects.
Hmm.
I think it's reflected in content in the sense that much of the content that I produce is rather practice based.
Mm.
The
Hmm.
content itself, it's kind of culturally progressive, I would say. Well, yeah, so it's the content itself, which is sourced by many different people, but these people also come to me because they feel comfortable, you know?
Mm.
So
Hmm.
that's already a kind of self-selective thing often. So that's the content itself. Then you have the editorial framing, the way that I approach books. I try and be generous in the editorial, so the textual tones, in the editorial layers that you can apply within a book to kind of narrate it, so to say,
Mm.
from back cover to title to introduction and whatever. These are things that I find really important and spend a lot of time doing. I'm often just a kind of blunt, naive outsider in this. Yeah, because I cannot dive into all projects really hardcore in depth, So I
Right.
know about structures and how to organize this. I suggest things, I ask questions, you know, and then it's up to others to kind of confirm because they can kind of authorize, can validate the content, and they can say, well, what you're saying here is bullshit. No, it should not move like that because it's like this, and then I drop it.
Right.
But,
Right.
but these kind of things, these conversations help. And I think these kind of editorial aspects are reflected in the books that I make, even though it might be kind of hidden. But yeah, the most evident thing I could say about that is the amount of titles that I wrote over the years, that I kind of made over the years, or just the titles and the subtitles, for instance, or the amount of back cover text that I've written over the years is just crazy. And often it's not written on the back in the colophon or anything, but yeah, there's a huge part of my voice, I guess, in that, and my approach in that, in how I kind of also um, respond to back cover text that other people write or so. So it's that's another layer, the editorial, and then there's design. The
Right.
the packing, how it all comes together, and to see what kind of spaces are available within the format of the book. What kind of spaces we might need, would it be useful to have another flap? What does that flap do to the content that we want to transfer? What does that flap do to the book as an object? Can we
Mm.
also do that differently? What kind of formats are possible? Does the budget allow for that? All of these things kind of come together.
I'm wondering how much you think about your role at Set Margins as curatorial. You mentioned that you were a curator before, but the way you just described that feels curatorial to me also. How do
Yeah.
you sort of draw on that background when you're, working on books and sort of thinking about what makes a Set Margins book?
I think you can be like you have different kind of designers. You have designers which are more editorial based. Some are more sculpturally have
Mm.
sculptural qualities. There's also a range in specificities that designers can have. And I think all that I also grew in my awareness of what design can do, for instance, and
Mm.
I grew into my knowledge of what a book and its specs can do. Almost as you know, as you have spaces in a museum or so that you can fill with a show, and that leave opportunities to place a text on a wall, or to put a sign somewhere, or to have a kind of audio thing or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's always this kind of, and I feel in the end, my background is way more academic, I would say. So I'm more content driven. So it's about my. In the end, it's about the content should come across. You know, it should
Right.
not be the design should not have the primacy, but the design is a means. You know, one of the best compliments I got on my books is, "Hey, your books are so anarchist, but they look so good." You know, I kind of like that. But people once said that to me,
Yeah.
and I felt like, yeah, I'm doing something good here. Uh, so yeah, I guess I have a kind of sensitivity to the different ends in that, and that's also why I'm not really a full-on content publisher, but
Mm-hmm.
also not full-on art visual content publisher. I guess, you know, I'm kind of in between, and then yeah, I try to kind of politicize stuff as well, and try to take on the political responsibility on as much levels as possible in doing that. So yeah, these things kind of come together. Maybe
It makes me think of something else that I'm sort of curious about, how you think about audience or readers or community that happens around these books. And the reason I'm asking that is I'm thinking about that line that someone told you, that your books are very anarchist but they look good, which feels like such a great description of your books, actually. And so many books that are about the margins or come from the margins can feel esoteric, they can feel obscure to people who are not familiar with
yeah,
those discourses or those dialogues. And you've said a couple times that you want to bring the margins, back into the center or into the center. And how do you think about that balance of, like, readers who are already primed for this content or this design or this subject, but then also doing that in a way that can invite others in, that cannot be something that is sort of off-putting and closed, but open and generative, the way you sort of described your editorial process?
yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot of divides within our societies, you know, cultural divides. For instance, one of the big aspects in the recent political campaigns for the elections here in the Netherlands was also a kind of undertone, which was against the woke kind of vibe,
Mm.
you know, who
Hmm.
felt threatened by the woke kind of vibe. And I think that is partially because woke was considered really also as a means, but you cannot enforce that as a means. You know, it's an end, and then you have to see how you can uh,
Mm.
create more support for that end
Mm.
with the means available. You know, you cannot just impose something to people. It goes too fast. You know,
Mm.
if they're not familiar with any of that, if they're not open by nature or by background or something, which many people are, you know,
Hmm.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Then you have to kind of massage it in a gentle manner. And so I think that's really important. So I'm not writing to please woke people, you know?
Right.
I,
Right.
in a way, I don't really care about that at all, with all respect. What I care about is getting these kind of voices also available to a wider audience. You know,
Hmm.
I'm not here to print 200 books that I share with my friends.
Right.
I
Right.
want to see if I can sell it in editions of a few thousand, if possible, by kind of playing all the opportunities that are available in printing, and see where we end up. You know, and
Yeah.
of course, it will always be the kind of direct audiences that will support it most. That will be my direct audience. But even for them, like for me, it's nice to have a kind of clear introduction, and
Mm-hmm.
not to have to, if you don't have a text on the back cover, and if you have some kind of really weird cover and there might be really good stuff inside, but yeah, you have to browse through the book for at least 15 minutes. Yeah, fuck that. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Right?
Eh,
It has to be
right.
really convincing. I want to know what I'm getting. We are already losing a lot of time. We are already heavily underpaid, all of us.
Right. Right.
So why would we mystify ourselves? That's kind of the left killing itself by endless bullshitting, and that's something that I deeply regret.
And so that comes through visual design, through back cover text, through subtitle, all these sort of little things that you were talking about earlier. That is your
I
way to
hope
sort of,
so. That's what I try to do, and what I try to urge and promote and do with the people I'm working with.
yeah.
And but it's vulnerable. It's difficult. My position is also kind of yeah. As I was saying before, I'm kind of blunt in this as well, and I'm not. Yeah, I'm not fully in. I'm not fully out, or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I kind of like that position and think it's good, but it's difficult to make things work and see what can be done and what can be done, and there's always risk.
Yeah, let's talk about that difficulty for a second, actually, because something that's so clearly very important to you and to sort of the set margins ethos is this idea of transparency, this idea of sort of where the money's going, how people are getting paid, making sure people are paid fairly. Um, you've written before. You had this great line: "Making a book work is a financial question as much as a design or an editorial one." And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the value of that transparency, about having a page on your website that outlines how much money things cost, where things are going, what the fact that there are sometimes not contracts. Can you sort of talk about how that structure came about and why it's important to sort of communicate that?
Well, many of the projects I'm realizing are with really low budgets.
Mm,
You know, so
mm-hmm,
so you have to see what you can do, what you cannot do, what is a fair payment based on the budget available and the kind of returns we could end up having with the book, which is again another reason to see if we can make books that sell better, because then you can
mm,
get more results, have a lower cost price, have more returns, or things like that.
mm-hmm,
And where to do that fair. Also, because as I always like to do, I'd like to have books that have a relatively low sales price, because then it's accessible in areas where
right.
people have less money, or for students who have less money and stuff. I find that important, but that's another aspect. To return to, so basically, there's two phases in the making of a book. There's the production phase where you have to see, what are the costs. There's the cost of print. There's the cost of design. There's the cost of a proofreader. There's the cost of a copy editor. There's the cost of authors, and so on. And see what that might be in an ideal situation, in a DIY situation. See what you can strip down when needed, see what
Mm,
you can capitalize with exploited labor, so to say, when needed, see what people are willing to do. And then there's the second phase of the actual, once a book is realized, uh, then you also get returns, and then you can consider, if these returns are, if the indication of returns is good enough, you can consider to kind of take a risk in the production part, in the first part,
mm,
um, just to kind of yeah, because you feel like, this is going to work, like we had with Silvio. That was really, we really paid for it ourselves. So Silvio invested a lot of money. I invested some money. I invested some labor. Silvio invested evidently a crazy amount of labor. But we both feel like the book is going to pay off. And and I think that's also entrepreneurship, but it's also knowledge of how to make that work.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of precarious. It's disrespectful in the sense that you're not sure of what you will be paid, and not sure if you will be paid in a kind of fairly way or not at the end. But that's just all you can do, and push the stuff. And why do you push the stuff? Because you feel you have to. And we're not going to sit on our asses and wait until we get tons of money by some kind of rich whoever
Right.
to write how rich people should spend their money, so to say, because that's in a way also what we're doing often. Um, but yeah, we're just going to start it ourselves and see where we end up, and that's entrepreneurship. But it's also a balancing act on a really precarious line. So Silvio has
Yeah.
his teaching positions, but there's many artists who are trying to survive. And then if they want to pay a graphic designer fare, if they want to pay copy editors and whoever fare, then costs are adding up. Who's going to pay for that if the book will not sell much?
Right.
Yeah, then you have to have funding. But if there's no funding, or if funding comes out late while you have to do a lot of work in advance, then you have to acknowledge that and see how you deal with that. And I think that is something that is often really underestimated, and can lead up to projects that kind of don't reach the potential that they might have. And I
Right.
think that's really a pity. And I want to address that all the time, and I want to make that clear.
It's so interesting to sort of hear how different that's your structure of working is from, if someone were to go to like a big publisher or a mid-sized publisher where you might get an advance, they have all that sort of these teams, et cetera. I think, there's pros and cons to that also, clearly. I'm wondering, like, what I hope this, I don't want you to answer this like a sales pitch, but like, what can you talk about the value that comes from that precarity? Like, what, to me it seems like, there's this sort of growing network of small publishers like yourself who are doing really interesting work that these big publishers would never be able to do. Can you talk about that a little bit, or sort of how you see yourself within the larger publishing sort of infrastructure?
I don't know exactly what the difference is per se, although much, the publisher cost, because there's also always publisher costs, cost of distribution, cost of storage, etc. Especially when starting set margins, I have also invested a lot, not just in building the infrastructure and paying for a new website and whatever, but also in printing books, or in
Right.
printing new titles, and so I can also, in a way, that's a bit like an advance, you could say.
Mm,
Or it's an advance of sorts. um, but yeah, I mostly like to work with royalties, through royalties.
mm.
And so first we have to see how we can afford the production of the book, and then we can see how we deal with the royalties, and what the sales indications are, and the risks are. Who takes the risks. Um, I think I might be different from many smaller publishers in that I do take risk there as well, that I do invest as well when I feel like it's legit. I just have to
Mm.
find some money somewhere. Um, but it's also different from maybe bigger publishers, where uh, where they already give a kind of advance,
Right.
to
Right.
get the author through the winter, so to say. I'm not doing that, because I also have to get through the winter first by selling some of the books.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's sort of what I was maybe thinking about when I asked that question is, when you get a big advance like that, or medium, I shouldn't even say big advance. When you get an advance like that, there's an expectation that a X number of books are going to be sold, and there are, it seems to me that the market considerations are much more in the forefront, where when you are investing yourself, when the author is investing themselves, when the designers are investing themselves, they're the you know, the pressure to sell is still there, but it is felt differently. Um, and I don't know if that's like an interesting question, but there's something interesting there to me.
Publishers give an advance when they have a good indication that it's
Yeah.
safe to do so. You know,
Hmm.
I also make my indications of sale.
Right. Right.
And these indications are included in budgets, sometimes more, sometimes less, or whatever. So they also inform the budget available. They inform how the book will be conceived. They inform the type of printer we can work with. They inform the kind of royalty percentage that authors receive. So in that sense, it's kind of similar, I guess.
We've talked a bit throughout this conversation about the infrastructure that you have built up, the knowledge of bookmaking and book production that you have, and that expertise that you sort of bring to these projects. And a lot of that came from the, I guess, like 15 years or so that you were the director and chief curator at Onomatopee. I always struggle to say. And I'm wondering if you can talk about sort of what you learned from working at Onomatopee that was both a gallery and a publishing infrastructure. What sort of lessons from that project have you embedded into what you're trying to do with set margins now?
Well, I started Onomatopee in 2006 together with a friend of mine, graphic designer Remco van Bladel. And I learned a lot also from Remco in the qualities of design and what design can do. Yeah, I was always more of a political, content based, poetic, whatever guy, curator. And as I mentioned, I can maybe the curatorial kind of inform my editorial way as well. As Onomatopee grew, because we started out making projects that also that also had a publication along with them.
Hmm.
So it was really a kind of curatorial endeavor with a book on the side, so to say, which was very much, I would say, self-publishing because we didn't know
Mm.
anything about publishing. We just made books in whatever
Right.
form,
Right.
and yeah, editorially, I learned a lot by doing and making mistakes. Made a lot of mistakes looking back on many of the books I made, but so that taught me a lot, and yeah, so and then over time we became a little bit more of a publisher as we started accepting more and more projects from the outside instead of only doing our own projects, where I was
Mm.
a kind of curator, initiator, fundraiser, and whatever. And Onomatopee also grew as a kind of organization to a kind of Kunsthalle size in a way. So I became more of a director and supervisor, if you will, of stuff. But yeah, it learned me a lot about these different roles in the process. It learned me a lot about the vulnerabilities. It learned me a lot about the different dynamics in
Mm.
these processes, the opportunities in the processes, my preferences in the processes, the moments where I should kind of be alert, the moments where I can kind of loosen the strings. Yeah, so that's what I learned very much. So that's also a reason why I managed to kind of put up set margins in, as you were saying at the beginning, how long have you been doing it? For 2 years now or whatever, but it's only just a little more than a
Right.
year. But I just know all the components of the works, so I kind of know how to lay it out. I know all of the things I need to have of the infrastructure, and yeah, of course I have a network,
Yeah.
and I have my own. I have a clear idea of how I want to do it and what I enjoy in doing that and what I value in doing that. And of course that's always a little bit flexible, and one project is different from another. That's always different, but yeah, so I think I would not have been able to pull off set margins if I wouldn't have done onomatopoeia for 16 and a half year or whatever it was.
I so admire what you do and how you do it, because like, I can't figure out if publishing and bookmaking has never been easier now than in history, or never been harder. Like, it feels like it's both easier and harder to try to do what you are doing. As you look back over your 15, 16 years as making books, how has that process changed? How has the sort of precarity of publishing and bookmaking um evolved, or have you noticed a change in that landscape?
Well, it's really also that question in a way. Your eventual question also very much connects to the thing you addressed a little before. Is it easy or is it
Yeah.
hard? And I think a lot of things have changed over the years. When I started in 2006, the infrastructure of publishing was way and way and way less, and we started at the right moment, because the kind of independent art book fairs were rising, cheap
Mm,
flights came about, internet really came about, so we could do a lot via the internet, and therefore the kind of basis for marginal economy, so to say, could also lift off and pick up,
mm,
and that really grew over the years. And I think there's much more awareness of this culture now, and the opportunities it holds.
yeah,
I
yeah.
even saw a zine making workshop here at our local library here in the city last week,
Oh wow.
which is crazy.
Yeah.
I was making zines. I didn't know the word way before I started onomatopoeia. The end of the 90s, I made
Yeah.
little, and then I went to the copy shop and made little poetry booklets that I sold, as kind of zines as, I don't know, a 17, 18-year-old guy.
Yeah. Nice.
But I didn't know that it was called zine. And now, because of internet, because this kind of culture is around, all the kids at design schools know about zines,
Right.
and
Right.
they are all thinkers, and they're all critically engaged.
Yep.
And so that's also a big difference from students at the art school when I started as a curator, who were kind of politically lame, you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was the first person of my age to call myself an independent curator here in Eindhoven, here in the city,
Mm.
and in the region. There was maybe one other one,
I
and
love that.
and now there is a school, an MA for curating and writing.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
the fuck? This stuff just grew. So therefore, I think it got easier in a sense that the landscape just flourishes. I
Yeah.
would say the landscape flourishes, and there's a lot of places where you can find uh, a good basis to work
Yeah.
out from. But then to really get at a level where you can, um, because anyone can make a little publishing venture, but to really make money out of it or to make it sustainable, yeah, you have to have the infrastructure, you have to have some experience, you have to have the capacity to pull that off. And I think, that's not quite easy. As I was saying, I could not have done this after 5 years of onomatopoeia. I could not have done this maybe after 7 years of onomatopoeia. But I can do it now, and I can even get loans now, and so
Right.
I'm willing to take a entrepreneurial risk as well, even though I live really poor and whatever now, trying to set it up. But
Yeah.
I think it's hard to really make it work. I think there's a lot of people, because that was the first thing I thought when they started this curatorial writing MA here in the city. What the fuck are these people going to do? Are they all just going to write zines and share it amongst each other? And I think that's really cool, and it's great that they're doing it, and that they create more bases, and therefore more of a market that becomes more visible and exposes itself at certain moments or whatever. But it could easily leave so many people disappointed, you know. And that's
Yeah,
also why a book like Afonso Matos is Who Can Afford to Be Critical, you know,
right.
this MA final thesis that he wrote, and that I saw on Instagram, and just thought, hey, this looks really good, we should publish this. But why that is so also symptomatic of today's time, you know, and why it's interesting to have a graphic designer like Kevin Loki design from Montreal, who has always been trying to push for a kind of independent agenda in a design practice, to see how he made his work, and how, and we're now going to publish his book, you know. So these kind of things are really exciting and really relevant now, I think.
I'm interested in what you were saying about sort of the rise of the word zine, and that, you know, there's a zine workshop and everybody's making zines, and that strikes me as true to me also. You know, I was an undergrad graphic design student 15, 16 years ago, and I was being taught that print was dead, that everything was going to be digital. You know, everything is online, the web is going to sort of take over. I'm teaching in a program now that has a big emphasis on digital design and apps and user experience, but students want to make stuff that's printed. They want to make stuff that's tactile. They want to make stuff that you can hold. They want to make stuff that's countercultural and politically engaged, just like you're talking about. And I'm wondering if you could, what your thoughts are on sort of the continued value and relevance of printed matter, whether that's the book, the pamphlet, the zine, um, why that has continued to be a form that is attractive to people.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. You know, in a way, I'm also just a little conservative in that end. You know, I've made this book about tactility, that when I questioned, you know, well, what is this myth about tactility? Why are we drawn to printed matter?
Yeah.
Is the kind of biopolitical thing that just manipulates us to kind of sniff, and you know, like
Yeah.
we want chocolate, and we want books, just to kind of, you know, fetishize ourselves and saturate ourselves with something. I don't exactly know, but I do think, you know, in the basis of it, it's about sharing, and it's about
Mm.
communicating, getting people together around stuff, and see what it could do. So it's engagement, it's solidarity, it's curiosity, it's fragility in opening up, you know, because you
Hmm.
show yourself in a fragile manner as well. Um, so I think these kind of things are are relevant to I think good people, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and will remain relevant. And yeah, I don't know, but I don't really find that in a digital environment. But I'm just really a kind of, how do you say, a uh, digital asshole. I don't know what the name is again. But
Y-
but
Yeah.
yeah,
Naive. Like you're naive about digital. Yeah.
yeah, digital, yeah, not native but naive, yeah. So it's not my field, but yeah, it also communicates differently. You know, when you sit together and with someone face to face, it communicates different from, you know, something that you can just spam and shout at people online anonymously.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you said about solidarity is actually right. This idea of sharing and sort of the collective experience, I think is right. Speaking of books, I don't know how much time you have to read for pleasure, with all the sort of work that you're doing. But what are you reading right now?
There's a few books that I have, that are kind of on my table. I have a book. What was it called again? I don't know the title anymore, but it's about. It's a kind of feminist take on metal culture,
Oh,
which
interesting.
I kind of liked. I think it's a book from Verso or something. Kind of, I always like. I'm drawn to metal music recently, and always
Mm.
death metal stuff from the Nordic countries. But then I kind of like it that there's this feminist vibe in it. Of course, there's always these kind of theory things that I have on my table, but I tend to scan it a little more than actively reading it. I just ordered a kind of what was it, the colonial design book
Oh
that
yeah.
looked interesting.
Yeah.
I'm interested for that, the stuff that really kind of goes off, because Dutch design is just really this kind of
Yeah.
economic imperialist bullshit kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, I use it, because it also sells and whatever. It's interactive to some people, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's also kind of bad and kind of outdated. I hope there's also conversation about it. Should design become more amateurish again, or
Yeah. Yeah.
which I find interesting conversations as well. I myself, as a designer, am not a trained designer.
Right.
I'm not really this damn skilled technical guy. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so what I'm reading, and then there's a few novels. I like reading novels if I have time.
This was such a great conversation. I think you're doing important work in a really interesting way. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's just what it is.
And that was my conversation with Freek Lomme. Our theme music is by Jeremiah Chu. The show is and always will be free thanks to the generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you like what we are doing, I hope you consider supporting us and get some bonus content each month. You can follow us across social media at Surface Podcast. You can listen to all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at our website, scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.